Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with the tour of my little book room here, this little space where the old bed is, and the nightstand, and the green shaded lamp, and my favorite books, the books that really mean the most to me, the ones that I go back to the most often. I thought it'd be neat to have a visual record of what this was like in 2025. I have other visual records of tours of this room on this channel. And I'm interested in looking at the differences. So we're on to the last three shelves of this bookcase. The next two of which I think I can do just sitting in a chair. So we'll do the Transwise books first. The first one of which is this beautiful Barnes & Noble edition of Dune. These editions that they have with the sprayed gilded edges there and the cloth bookmark and the gorgeous end papers. I don't know really how many of these Barnes & Noble continues to make, but boy, oh boy, are they good. A lot of them are really, really good. So I grabbed that one, even though I don't need any more copies of Dune. I got it anyway. Okay, then we have a larger book. This is Connections by James Burke. This is the heavily illustrated companion to his BBC series by the same name, about the history of technology and the odd ways that one development, one discovery of technology will have unforeseen side effects and unforeseen knock-on effects until there are whole industries that are built up around things that had no idea such potentials were possible. It's an amazing show. It really is, and he's a very entertaining. There he is as a very young man. He's a very entertaining narrator. I think this series is wonderful, especially the final episode. Because the final episode of this series naturally looks to the future. And in the 1970s, James Burke was a futurian. He was someone who was practiced at anticipating the future. If nothing else, researching a show like this would make you that. And here he is in the 1970s, poised on the greatest technological innovation in the history of the human race, the internet, and not quite knowing what it was. He could sense something out there, but he wasn't quite sure what it was. But the one sentiment that he makes in that final episode with the most certainty is that you have the capability to understand anything, provided it's explained clearly enough. In other words, there is no two cultures. There is no dividing line between the people who understand the technology that rules your world and you. And, Carl Sagan was fond of saying and wrote a book about the fact that if you allow there to be such a gap, there will be people who take advantage of that. A pointless message now, of course, but because the James Burke in the final chapter of Connections, Carl Sagan in his book, The Demon Haunted World, are warning against, railing against, guarding against a world in which ignorance is celebrated and in which no one knows anything about the technological forces that rule their world. They were railing against that world, and that world has now come upon us in complete realization and rules the most powerful nation in the history of the world, where education is sneered at. Not a kind of education, just education itself is sneered at. So these things have a kind of nostalgic appeal to them. Anyway, those are the Transwise books. Now we will move on to the books on the shelf, starting with this one. A lot of these are going to be old favorites. I talk about these things. I love them. That's why they're in here. This is by Alan Weisman. This is The World Without Us. And this is his extended mental exercise about what would happen if humanity disappeared from the world in an instant. Not a slow decline by a march towards extinction or whatnot, but if magically humans were to disappear, all of them at once, tomorrow, what would the world be like? And he goes through every scenario in the world, from domesticated animals to agriculture to the ocean, and it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think he wanted this book to be a bestseller. I think he wanted it at least to have a chance of being a bestseller. It became a bestseller, so he got that. But I think one of the ways that you can tell that he wanted this to be a bestseller is that he does not make it overly gloomy. It's full of fascinating tidbits, but there is an unavoidable outcome of all of humanity disappearing instantly overnight. And that would be the near fatal irradiation of the entire planet's biosystem. The world would go on. The planet would go on. But saying that mice and rabbits and coyotes and feral dogs and cockroaches and talking about any of them is kind of pointless. There are 300 nuclear reactors on Earth that are dead man switches. They were intentionally built, and they are intentionally made so that humans have to keep them from exploding, from melting down. It's not that they'll melt down if they malfunction. It's that they'll melt down if they aren't tended to by humans. If all humans were to disappear, all of those reactors, including quite a few of them at sea, would go critical. And more or less all at once. So I don't think there'd be a world, a living biosphere without us. I think what would be left after 10 years would be a cautionary tale for anyone who comes and finds it. But the thought experiment is still fascinating to read. Okay, then we have a novel. This is H.F. Saint, Memoirs of an Invisible Man. This is a novel about a man who is caught in a science experiment at the beginning of the book, and it turns him invisible. So what happens? what happens to him if that's true? Leaving aside for the fact that there are government agents who think that someone might have been turned invisible at this experiment, and they want very much to find that person. Leaving that aside, what are all the basics? How do you get food in the pre-DoorDash days? How do you live? How do you get the money to pay your rent? How would you pay your rent in the pre-internet days when you had to deliver it to your landlord when he can't see you? It's in H.G. Wells's book, The Invisible Man makes himself invisible in order to perfect the technology that will allow him to rule the world. And he turns out to be a whiny sack of crap. This book, the main character did not intend to become invisible and has to deal with it. And we are therefore rooting for him. You're never rooting for the main character in H.G. Wells's book, but you're rooting for this character. And it's terrific. It really is. It's just a terrific novel. I don't know what you would even call it. I guess I would have to call it science fiction. But I don't know. I rail all the time on this channel about what I call carpetbaggers. People who use science fiction type artifices just to make a point about how horrible men are, without doing any real world building. This doesn't, I mean, it's like that in one way because it's not a science fiction novel in the genre embracing sense of the word, but it's not like it in another way because H.F. Saint has extensively thought out what this would be like, what it's like. It's really, really good. You wouldn't think it, but if you see it at a yard sale, give it a try. You're really going to like it. Then we have James Goldman. This is the author of The Lion in Winter. This is a novel, Myself as Witness, a novel that he wrote about King John, the luckless son of the characters that he made great in The Lion in Winter, Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. This is John's story. And it's a horrible story of one fiasco after another by a needy loser, narrated by Gerald of Wales, who's an old friend of mine. Then we have this is Justin Peters, The Idealist. This is about Aaron Swartz, who was a budding genius in the very dawn of the internet days, who stole files from JSTOR and was facing a federal trial and decided to kill himself rather than do that. Just a bewildering story. I don't think there are 3 major books on this story, and I have all of them. I've read all of them. I like all of them, but I think there's a great book to be written that none of these things are. The Idealist comes closest to being a great book on this subject. It's a maddening subject. Absolutely maddening. And of course, it, like The World Without Us, opens up all kinds of hypotheticals. All kinds of them. Aaron Swartz would certainly not have gone to jail for more than a year. I doubt he would have gone to jail at all. I think he overreacted to the case that was being made against him. Not to find conspiracy theorists behind every mulberry bush, but I'd say that the overreaction that he had of killing himself was exactly what the federal government wanted. They tend to do that. when they come at you, they tend to come at you with verbiage and actions and even personnel designed to make you feel like your whole world is about to end. Aaron's world was not about to end. He was about to go through a rough year. That's all. So you think about the hypotheticals. What if, I don't know, if you're determined to kill yourself, you probably will, but his girlfriend knew that something was wrong. She could have been if she'd been a little more vigilant or got somebody else involved. Or what if he changed his mind? That's one hypothetical. And then the other hypotheticals that flow from that are horrifying, and I try not to think about them too much. There's a good chance that he would have gone the way of Mark Zuckerberg, of Jeff Bezos. There's a good chance that he would now be a fascist, a billionaire and a fascist, someone who is a literal Nazi. And that would be horrifying. I would hate that. I don't like to think that way, but I can't guarantee it. So I love the books. I go back to the books, but I don't know. I don't think there are any other Aaron Swartz books in this room. I think I just have this one in here. It's a complex subject for me. Let's just put it that way. Okay, then the next two are the same book. That is very rare for two copies of the same book to be together. This is Frankenstein. So one I have is this battered old trade paperback with pictures by Barry Moser. He did, look at that. He did really suggestive pictures all throughout here. And the other is something that I've already mentioned. We mentioned it yesterday. This is Leonard Woolf did a great book called The Essential Dracula, and he did The Essential Frankenstein as well, where he just goes through and heavily footnotes the story. And the footnotes are great fun. These are great fun books to have. Then we have Bern Heinrich. This is One Man's Owl. This is his story of the author and two of his dependents. This is the story of him more or less getting to know, not adopting really, but getting to know an owl at his country property, and it's delightful. This guy wrote Ravens in Winter. He wrote Summer World and Winter World. He's terrific to read. Just a terrific natural historian. One of the many, many owl books that are in this room. Then we have a collection of short stories of Frank O'Connor. I forever and ever had this as there's a very iconic almost trade paperback of this with an Irish bar, an Irish pub on the cover. And I've had copies of that endlessly, and it always falls apart. It is not a well-made trade paperback, so I finally decided just to get the hardcover, because I go back to these stories. The reason I went through half a dozen of those trade paperbacks is because I go back to these. Frank O'Connor is great, and this is a great volume. Then we have an illustrated book of English country houses. So this has the insides and the outsides of a whole bunch of English country houses, big and small, bigger and smaller. And I love this subject. I can't get enough of this subject. So I have lots of books on this subject, and most of them are what you'd think. They're oversized picture books, which are inconvenient. This is a normal sized book. And so it's in here because I go to it all the time when I want to refresh my memory on the history of some country house or other. Okay, then this next one I believe is more recent. There are some recent things in here. Do I have a pub sheet for this? That would be a way to settle the bet. Do you have a pub sheet? Let's take a look. This, I think, would have been before we were talking with each other, so... No, you don't. All right, well, you are from when? Is this from before we were talking to each other? You don't tell me that either. Okay. 2021. No, we were talking to each other. This is by Daniel Ogden, and this is The Werewolf in the Ancient World. Slim volume from Princeton, a book about all the writings that we have on werewolves and the illness of lycanthropy or the mythology involved from as many ancient peoples as had traditions along those lines. Could have been much longer. It's written in a bit of a dry tone, but I really liked it. I really, really liked it. Also not the only werewolf book in this room. Let's see here. And then we will finish up. We're at 15 minutes. Yes, we'll finish up with this thing. I've shown you this many times before. There was a back when Star Trek books were popular, and there were many Star Trek books every month, an author named Diane Carey came up with an idea. What if there were a place, a bar with food, but a bar called the Captain's Table that only admitted captains of vessels? So crew are not admitted. Only captains are. But that maybe there's something a little bit mystical about the Captain's Table, and maybe it can admit any captain anywhere. And that naturally appeals, because that was a reason for the producers of this series to go to various writers and say, well, in the Star Trek lore, there are many captains, and we would like you to write a story about this captain or that captain or the other captain, and we'll put them all together in the Captain's Table. And they came out as novels in the various franchises that were getting novels at the time. And then they were made into a big book, books 1 through 6 of the Captain's Table, which I found falling apart at Goodwill. And you see the captains. There's Janeway, and that tips the hand right away to the fact that the Captain's Table is a little bit mystical, because Janeway is 80,000 light years away from the Federation. She still manages to go to this place. You've got Benjamin Sisko, Jean-Luc Picard. You've got Captain Kirk, of course, and Captain Sulu. They're all on the cover. Then on the back, you have these two. And that is a character created by the writer Peter David. For his own series of Star Trek books. They never were canon. The fans like them. Peter David fans certainly like them. And that is Captain Christopher Pike. Only that's not the Anson Mount version of Christopher Pike, that who is in Strange New Worlds now. That is the Christopher Pike who makes an appearance in the pilot for Star Trek. And of course, missing from this roundup is anything later than this book, especially Captain Archer. I would love another Captain's Table round, another round of books with more captains. That would be wonderful. But each one of these is a story about a different captain. They're not connected with each other, except that they all go to this place. They don't meet each other either at this place. They meet other captains, but not each other. And someone got this book. This copy was, what, $17. Someone got this book and decided that this was going to be their own anthology. They were going to modify it for their own tastes. I was standing there in the thrift shop looking at this thing and thinking, oh my, you've got to be kidding me. I have got to have this. First way that they modified it, let me see if I can find you a handy example. It varies from story to story. The first way that they modified the book was by censoring it. They went through and censored anything they considered to be a cuss word of any kind. All through the book. This doesn't happen often, but all through the book, in every story, something is censored. Where the original owner of this book thought, that doesn't belong here. But more than that, even more wonderfully than that, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell. Here, let me get the bookmark out of here. They entirely removed the Peter David section. They just cut it out completely. Because Peter David's captain is not canon. So they just cut the thing completely out of the book. It goes, I don't know if you're going to be able to make it out. They just cut this whole section out of the book. So there's no Mackenzie Calhoun. It goes straight to Captain Pike. And so even if you presented me with a brand new condition trade paperback of this, I wouldn't take it, because this is too precious to me. It is too precious to go. I'm not missing much with Peter David prose. I'm not missing much. So I don't worry that I haven't read the story. I read all the others though multiple times. The Captain Janeway story in here is excellent. The Christopher Pike story is excellent as well. It doesn't bear any resemblance, of course, to Strange New Worlds. Right, because it took place 30 years before that show was conceived. So on the Christopher Pike Enterprise, in the story here in the Captain's Table, there are men. So I mean, white men. There are white men on the Enterprise aside from Captain Pike, and that isn't true in Strange New Worlds at all. And also, none of the women characters in this story have superpowers that make them the single most powerful person in the history of the Federation. All of them, even though they can't all be that because they're all there at the same time. None of the women have superpowers in this story. so it takes a little bit of adjusting, but I liked it a lot. The Janeway story best was my favorite in that volume, but the volume itself brings a smile to my face every time. So there you go. That's another shelf of our library tour. It took a little longer, but I will be back. We will continue. I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.